Hello and welcome to the review of the day from me, Deb, the omnivorous reader. And this is an omnivorous option. Agatha Christie, A Pocket Full of Rye. So this is the second detective in a row I've read. My last review was for James Hadley Chase. I'm revisiting my roots of mystery detective, I guess. This is a nice little Fontana copy that I picked up recently at the Lifeline Book Fest. Someone remarked on how much they liked the Fontanas, so apparently they're not as common worldwide as I thought they were. Now, I have read A Pocket Full of Rye before, 24 blackbirds emerging from the pie, but I haven't owned it for a while. I got rid of my copies a few moves away, I think, and I haven't read it since. So that was good in that I couldn't remember the plot. I was remembering things as they happened with this sort of deja vu feeling, but I wasn't actually remembering them ahead of times. And recently I decided I'd sort of try without trying too hard to acquire all of the Agatha Christies. And this is a progression in that sequence. Okay, so Agatha Christie is an interesting one. She's one of those authors who's become so part of popular mythology that everyone knows her. But everyone knows her means that a lot of people know her without having actually read any of hers. And when you talk to people, you get various responses. One person I know always responds if I mention Agatha Christie with "the butler did it," which is funny, sure, indicative of the fact of never having read very many of them also. But yeah, so Dame Agatha Christie wrote for years and she is iconic, and her books are far more varied than some people would think. Now, A Pocket Full of Rye was first published in 1953. It was serialized twice. I think it first came out serialized in the United Kingdom. It later became serialized in America. But 53, I believe, is the year it was first published as a full novel. So she'd been writing for about over 2 decades at that stage. She was an experienced author, and A Pocket Full of Rye has got a couple of peculiarities to it. So the plot in general terms is that it starts with Rex. It's Fortescue. He's in his office. His very highfalutin secretary brings in his tea, and next thing we know, he is falling to the ground dead quite fast. This whole sequence, and you've got the typing pool responding to it, and the secretary, Miss Irene Grosvenor, competent, beautiful, blonde secretary, loses her cool over it. All these things are happening. It's an interesting scene because Agatha Christie, I don't think too many times, writes the actual first murder scene in a book as humorous. But in this one, it's very humorous. There's elements of tongue-in-cheek. You've got secretaries in the secretary pool trying to ring people and then changing their mind, trying to ring other people. It's got a levity to it you don't normally associate with this kind of murder. So that was a little bit different. Another thing that's a bit different about it is that the next thing that happens is there is a Inspector Neil, Inspector of the CID, Criminal Investigation Division, goes to the house. He breaks to the Fortescue's family that he's died. There's a daughter living at home who wants to marry someone called Gerard, something like that, who her father hadn't approved of, so he wasn't going to give them any money. There's Mrs. Fortescue, Adele, who is the newest wife. She's, I think, 20 years younger than Rex Fortescue, and is described at one stage, I believe, as a sexy piece. There's a son living at home with a wife who's a bored housewife without much house to wife over because it's an established house. There's a son who's in disgrace overseas, but maybe coming back having married into the lower nobility, thus appealing to his father's sense of, what is it? I'd call it snootiness, but whatever. And he may be coming back or he's not coming back, but the other son doesn't know about that. He's still a partner in the firm that his brother and father were members of. There's a lot of people, and a pretty prominent character also is the housewife, Miss Mary Dove, I think her name is, definitely Dove, possibly Mary, who's incredibly competent in running the whole household. There is a butler, completely uninvolved in the crime, no spoilers. There's a maid, and there's a cook. So the next murder, of course, anyone who knows the rhyme that this is based on, A Pocket Full of Rye, the king was in the counting house counting out his money, the queen was in her parlour eating bread and honey. So yes, the next murder that we encounter is the wife Adele. She's discovered in the parlour during tea, and she's had her tea poisoned with cyanide. And then it goes on from there. So there's a few other things that are interesting and a bit different for Agatha Christie in A Pocket Full of Rye. For a start, nearly everyone in this book is unlikable. Now, Agatha Christie usually has a large suite of characters who may or may not have committed the murder and may or may not be sympathetic to a greater or lesser degree. But generally, you've got more sympathetic characters, and in this book, you really don't have any of the main characters as sympathetic. They're all unlikable, and some of them are outright nasty, and the other ones are ciphers. So it's interesting for Christie in that regard. Now, Christie's known for writing cozy mysteries before the term even existed, giving you a comfortable, not too confrontational mystery that is slowly discovered. And this does stand out. Now, another way in which this one stands out is that of the investigator, our Inspector Neil isn't actually the person who solves the crime. We have our Agatha Christie character who's the crime solver. In this case, it's Miss Marple. Now, I quite like Miss Marple. It's always seemed a bit of a shame to me that there's so many Hercule Poirots but not as many Miss Marples. This is the 8th Miss Marple. And she doesn't even appear in the book until we're well and truly halfway through. We've got all the characters established, we've got the crimes, we've got potential motives, we've got a lot given to us long before Miss Marple comes on the scene. And the reason she comes on the scene is because the maid, who is a victim, which we see coming, 4 and 20 blackbirds, the rhyme says, how does it go? The maid was in the garden hanging out the clothes. Down came I'm going to say dicky bird. Blackbird? And pecked off her nose. Anyway, the maid in question's name is Gladys. So Gladys was trained by Miss Marple when she first came to her from the orphanage. This orphanage, which provides Gladys Martin, that's her name, parlour maid, at Yew Tree Lodge. Gladys and other maids being trained by Miss Marple are often an element of plot development in the Miss Marple stories. I think because this was number 8, Agatha Christie didn't really do much with her. She just arrives on the scene, talks to people, listens to people, and eventually comes to the conclusion, the accurate conclusion as it happens. She gives that to the inspector and then says, well, it's up to you to prove it. But there is a footnote to that, which I'm not going to give away because maybe you haven't read it and you're going to. Now, because I had read it so many times, I could kind of remember who'd done it, and I could kind of remember the processes. So it wasn't a mystery for me, it was very much a cozy read, and I enjoyed it. It's well written. There's a lot about it that is very enjoyable. I think that there's another element to this that I really wanted to mention. So the first murder, Rex Fortescue, in his office, He is found with the pocket full of rye, which makes no sense to everyone. They're trying to make sense of it. Until Miss Marple comes along knowing the 4 and 20 blackbirds rhyme, no one figures out the pocket full of rye. I don't think it's a huge giveaway to say that Rex Fortescue wasn't actually poisoned by his tea. He'd been poisoned at breakfast with a slow-acting poison. The slow-acting poison in question is taxine, a toxic alkaloid which is obtained from the yew tree. Now, in one of the many plot twists in this book, it's revealed that the bored housewife of one of the sons, Percy's, Mrs. Percy, isn't it lovely that they just became Mrs. Husband? Ew, they weren't even called by their name, they were called by their Mrs. Husband. Ugh. So glad I'm not living in the 50s right now. Okay, so she'd been a nurse before her marriage, and that's brought up as maybe she could have done it at one stage. And it talks about the taxine. Now, an interesting point about that is that when it's discussed in this book, it says there's no actual medical use for it, and at the time this was written, that was true. However, in a strange twist of fate, taxine or Taxol has now become the source of one of the foremost chemotherapy drugs. It's used for ovarian cancer, esophageal cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, and a whole heap of others, including pancreatic and cervical. So the no medical use of it in this book has actually changed since then. I thought that was an interesting addition to the story. Okay, A Pocket Full of Rye by Agatha Christie. I really enjoyed it. I think I'm going to move on from mysteries for a bit before I get bored. I need variation in my reading, hence omnivorous. I think my next one is going to be an A.E. Van Vogt. Looking forward to this one. And as a footnote, I've been meaning to say for a while, from my book haul in January, I got Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. I've been looking for that for a while, and I've got a feeling that I was discussing with someone on the BookTubes the possibility of doing this one as a buddy read. I can't remember who it was. My memory is notoriously bad. That's what started me off doing book reviews to begin with. It helped me remember the books I'd read. If it was you that I was discussing doing a buddy read with, Out of the Silent Planet, please do mention in the comments. I'm not going to start it in the next week or two, but I apologise for forgetting who you are if you're watching this. It won't be the last time I forget who someone is, so I better get used to it. Okay, thanks for watching. Read good books, maybe even some Agatha Christie's. This may not be her best book, but it's certainly one of her more unusual ones, and she does have some very good books indeed. Have a great day. Read good books.